Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services here this morning, we would kindly ask everyone to please turn off or silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember her. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember her. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember her. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember Minnie. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember our beloved Minnie. When we have joys that we yearn to share, we will remember her. So long as we live, Minnie too shall live, for she is now a part of us as we remember her. Friends, we're gathered here this morning to honor the memory and the legacy of Minnie Kaufman, who we lay to rest today after 105 years. 105 years of life. As we begin our service this morning, I want to offer my condolences to her entire family, in particular to David and to Jerry and to Adam and to Paul and to many more family members who we'll be hearing about and from later. And I also want to recognize the presence of some other clergy who's here with us this morning. First, Cantor Jana Schachter, the Director of Religious Services at Lionsgate, and also Rabbi Ira Stone. And I'll also note that also here with us this morning is Oded Kraus, our Executive Director of our JCC, and many other JCC staff members and professionals and leaders from our South Jersey Jewish community, all whose lives Minnie touched. We begin this morning, as we've done for so many years, the tradition of our people, at difficult moments like this, with the recitation of Psalms. Shir Hamalot Esaina El Heharim Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Ezri Me'im Adonai Osei Shamayim V'Haaretz Al Yitein Lamot Raglecha Al Yanuhum Shomerecha Hine Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael Adonai Shimcha Adonai Tziocha Yad Yeminecha Yomam Hashemesh Lo Yakecha Ve'yareach Balayla Adonai Yishmorcha Mikol Ra Yishmor et nafshecha Adonai Yishmor tzedcha Uvolecha Me'ata ve'ad olam. Psalm 121, a song for ascents. I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your soul. Adonai guards your going and coming, now and forever. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar. Binodesha yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yinahaleni. Nafshi yashovev. Yancheni b'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begetz hamavet. Lo irara ki ata imadi. Shiftecha mishantecha hema yenachemuni. Taroch lefanai shochan neged sorarai. Dishanta v'shem en roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai. Le'orech yamim. Those were the Hebrew words of Psalm 23, also known as the Shepherd's Psalm, a psalm that we turn to in difficult moments such as this one. I'll invite everyone to join with me in the English of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Friends, as we are about to conclude reading the book of Genesis in our annual Torah reading cycle this Shabbat, we see that in the book of Genesis, in the book of Bereshit, that when a loved one passes away, it's family members and loved ones that step forward to offer words of memory and eulogy. And that's exactly what we will do now in Minnie's honor, as first we're going to hear from her son, David, and then from her grandson, Paul. David.
You were right, dear. They have boxes of tissues here. This is good. So let this be the day I stay on script, something I'm not used to. But I'll start off script. So I want to, of course, thank you all for being here. It means a lot to our family. It means a lot, I'm sure, to my mom, and we appreciate it. I want to thank the rabbi who has provided us with a model of spiritual support, and it's meant a lot, and we thank you, Rabbi. My whole family thanks you. Finally, I want to recognize the ladies sitting back there who cared for my mother with the love of family members. That's Maria, Bianca, Diana. Dorcas could not be here. Ladies, we could not have asked for more. So thank you so much. Well, my good friend and former practice partner, David Galetto, on hearing the news of my mother's death, sent me a text, and he said she was a remarkable woman. So here are some remarks for you. My mom arrived in New York City from Poland via Cherbourg, France, at age 7. She and my grandma Hilowitz, along with my uncles Bill and Frank and my Aunt Molly, were greeted by my grandfather. We are in America now. We speak English here, no more Polish. And so began a life of biblical span in a place that was big enough to accommodate all of my mother's dreams. And now I'm going to go off script for a minute. My mother loved this country and appreciated this country. And I do as well. And I thank her for that. And she was never afraid to tell people that. She probably was never afraid to tell anybody anything. In this country, my mother became a force. She was a dynamo. She was possessed with, and perhaps by, a fierce ambition and a need to self-actualize. That was the beast she fed for the 74-plus years that it was my honor to know her. Informed by her Eastern European parents that they had saved money to send only their sons to college, my mother worked for the tuition to attend night school at Hunter College. Capitalizing on this education and a gift for numbers, she began a successful life in business, serving as a bookkeeper for a number of businesses. I believe this was the genesis of two of the major themes of my mom's life. Don't accept limitations. Don't ever accept limitations, especially those imposed by others. And my mother's abiding interest in the success of women. In middle age, well, it was middle age at least for most of us, I think. She started as a bookkeeper at a paper factory in Brooklyn. After introducing this $30 million business to the computer, and I can still remember the plastic ring programming guides and the yellow legal pads with her scribbled notes. Unfortunately, my brother Danny, who taught himself Fortran, which was a computer language, he taught himself that as a high school sophomore. He was no longer at home. But she managed her way through that, and she worked her way up from bookkeeper to the controller of Daving Quality Paper, earning a hefty salary and able to drive to work daily in a company car. At work and at home, she really was a model of integrity. She was unfailingly honest and expected the same from everyone around her. She instructed her bosses that if they had issues with any of the work in the bookkeeping department, that she was responsible and to speak to her and to her only. Before each of her numerous, and I mean numerous, hastily scheduled meetings with my teachers and my school principals, she always asked me first what happened. And there were a few times, as it happened, when I was falsely accused, and one of them some very nasty business. I never told you about that, Jerry. And I'm not going to tell you now. And at those times especially, her trust in me was a huge gift. Drawing on a more positive aspect of her Eastern European upbringing, my mother was always focused on health. Meat always came from the butcher she knew. Eggs were purchased from Joe and Gertie Keats's dairy, where Mom could watch them candle the eggs. Fruits and vegetables were inspected, massaged, percussed to assure their worthiness. Her matzo brie, lamb and beef stew, and brisket were legendary, and they remain the best I have ever tasted. Like her father, well, her father was obviously my grandfather. In his mid-80s, he was a fixture on Brighton Beach, which, after all, was only 3 bus rides away from the Brooklyn apartment they lived in. In his mid-80s, he was doing jumping jacks and burpees next to his beach blanket. And so my mother took this from him, and she was devoted to regular exercise. She swam almost daily from age 50 to age 102. After being pressured by my dad to retire at age 75, she began to indulge her artistic bent. Always with an eye for color and style, my mom took art lessons and developed a number of signature personal styles, including small bits of fabric, dried mango pits, and bubble wrap in her blue ribbon winning pieces. She sold a few pieces and, of course, insisted on my referring her from that time on as a professional artist. However, despite this second profession, my mom bitterly complained throughout her 90s and beyond, "No one will hire me." Mom also had the teaching gene. My brother and I could read at age 3, and I calculated and counted the change on countertops too high for me to see. At work, she took great pride when one of her girls was hired away to a better position at another firm. After retiring from work, she designed and led a course for foreign-born women who lived in her neighborhood. She taught them business English and business practices in her apartment in Rockville, Maryland. Several years after losing my brother and then my dad, my mom moved to New Jersey and settled in Cherry Hill. She began a new life, which frankly was spent mostly at the Cats JCC. She had found heaven on earth, a swimming pool with lap lanes, an art program, courses in theater, poetry, cinema, Saturday afternoon simulcasts of the Metropolitan Opera, and lots of very bright, cultured, educated, and accomplished women. She was so proud that she could hold her own with all of them. And I need to mention, thanks to the generosity of my wife, Jerry, the arts program at the JCC will forever bear her name. That's our gift to her. Oh, and yes, she discovered the internet and email. This was milk and honey. When old age and its limitations eventually overtook my mom, she never complained. Well, She still thought the food at Lionsgate was too salty, but other than that, there really weren't any complaints. In her dotage, as I mentioned, she was attended lovingly by Maria, Bianca, Diana, and Dorcas, who is not here. And she died in her sleep, absent of pain or even discomfort, a model in how to live and how to die. So Godspeed, Mom. And say hi for me to Dad and to Danny if you can find the time. We love you, and we always will. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.
Paul.
Funeral homes provide tissues, but a scout is always prepared. My dad has spoken, and I suspect that my rabbi will speak shortly of my grandmother's strength. I'm going to try to speak a little bit of her weakness. There's a lot to say about her strength. And my mom was undoubtedly formidable in many ways, a force. And she was, by virtue of that force, able to shatter barriers, defy expectations, bend the world to her will in so very many ways, through several different reinventions and reincarnations that ultimately proved as numerous as the different artistic phases we've all enjoyed. But I was blessed to know her more in the latter half of her life. And while I still recall for everyone here and treasure that force, the dynamic, extroverted, opinionated Minnie, I also saw her after some of that wind had been taken from her sails, when she needed a ride to the supermarket rather than being able to drive the company car. Others have spoken and will speak of those lessons that she's taught in assertiveness, in equity, in creativity. But the lesson I think I take most from her in the end is about change. Because haltingly, and at times unexpectedly or unwillingly, she did change. My grandmother, of course, prided herself throughout her life on her independence. And indeed, even deep in the last few weeks, in the dementia that eventually overtook her, surrounded by Maria, or Bianca, or Dorcas, or Diana, providing for her every need, she would fiercely remind her visitors that she was in independent living. But in the end, in the last decade and a half in Cherry Hill, the girl who came to America without speaking a word of English and was told upon arrival that that is all that she would speak, the teenager who was denied college, who became a comptroller, she began to need people to get to the grocery, to get to her classes, to get to the pool that became her healing water. Her community of education, of exercise, of Lo Shankara, her locker room at the JCC that became her world, her life, every bit a new life for her as New York was at the age of 7. And while she remained that fiercely independent person, always ready to do it her way, she also began to connect with other people on a more meaningful level. She started saying thank you more. Not always, and sometimes not when it was needed most, but gratitude for others became a part of her life. She talked more often of the people she loved, her friends and her companions, her mentors and mentees, her classmates at the JCC, who made the things that she loved possible. She started to say, I love you more, and she meant it more. And she was, I think, happier because of those connections that she was forging. At the end of her life, one of the things that she would most report was seemingly out of nowhere, her email address. She would chant it in response to questions about food or drink or what she wanted to watch on TV. I am minmango at AOL.com, she would say. But it wasn't really that out of place, because the community that she maintained, the email that connected her to the friends around the world, the terrible jokes and slightly inappropriate chain emails, those became a part of her life, part of her anchor, once we lost first Danny and then my papa. And that later iteration of my grandmother, the penultimate one of her life, is the one that I'm going to remember and treasure now. Because those thank yous were real. And her connection to each of the people, new or old, forged at the beginning of her life or at its end, is what sustained her, what brought her peace and happiness. So yes, my mom was a powerhouse. She was an unstoppable force when she wanted to be. And it was those qualities that allowed her to weather the challenges of her life, to break ceilings that were not always glass, and to find strength to keep going when she lost her husband of more than 5 decades and her beloved firstborn son. But it was not always a life of pure independence, of being unaffected by others, an unmitigated force. She began to need others not as satellites in her orbit, but as an essential part of living. And so there are many lessons of my grandmother's life that we could take, but among them, the one I will value most here today, and value somehow even more than that thing about not salting your food before you taste it, is this one. It's okay to change. It's okay to adapt. It's okay for even the most independent, unrelenting, forceful of women to soften a bit, to lean on family and on friends who were family as well, of course. So I will remember Mindel the Force, but I will also remember with greatest fondness those thank yous and the I love yous. And yes, the calls always the night before cash was needed, always in 5 and 10s, or the almond milk had run out and the almond milk at Lion's Gate was not the right almond milk. Or someone had to reboot that computer so that minmango at AOL.com could once again search those digital waves. So, today, as we all gather to remember her and we all mourn, let's follow that example. Today, this week, this month, this year, as we adjust to a life without her. There's no shame on leaning on one another, in calling on one another when a need arises, or a tear wells, or a memory intrudes unbidden. We all need each other. In times of joy, certainly, but sadness too. We need those with whom, even in times of death, we create new lives for ourselves. There is no true independent living. Independent living and dependent living are two sides of the same coin. So I will close with the words my grandmother spoke more and more in her last years. We love you, Mama, and thank you all.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Paul. Beautiful tributes. So as I mentioned earlier, in our annual Torah reading cycle, we are reading from the book of Genesis, the book of Breshit, and in particular, this week we're reading the final Torah portion of the book, Vayechi. Vayechi tells of the passing of both our patriarch Jacob and later his son Joseph. And Vayechi literally means, and he lives. At first brush, it's curious that a Torah portion that contains so much loss is known by the word Vayechi, Chayim, life. And yet embedded within this title is a powerful lesson. The life that we live determines the legacy that we leave and the way in which our memory will live on when our life comes to an end. Minnie Kaufman certainly understood this lesson. Vayechi, and she lives. While we come together today to lay Minnie to rest and to mourn her passing, we also come together today to celebrate her 105 years of life, a life that was truly a work of art, a life defined by fierce determination, unbounded creativity, wonderful friendships, and a deep love of family. To Minnie's family, namely to her son David, and daughter-in-laws Jerry and Dale, Dale's husband Stephen, to her grandsons Paul and Adam and their wives Sarah and Laura, to her grandsons Benjamin, Daniel, Joshua, and Nate, and to her family members Marion and her husband Murray, and to all other family and friends who were her greatest love and joy. I offer you my sincerest condolences and sympathy on the loss of your beloved mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and friend. Minnie was a larger-than-life person who you all affectionately knew not only as Minnie, but also as Minna, Mindel, Mom, Mamam, and Mama. Vayechi, boy did she live. Minnie was born on April 1st, 1918, in Nowosanz, Poland, to her beloved parents, Peretz and Leah, who was better known as Leicha. Minnie was blessed with 3 siblings, Molly, Bill, and Frank, all of blessed memory, and she grew up in a loving and hardworking family. As a young child, we heard that Minnie and her family immigrated to the U.S. thanks to the generous help of their Aunt Rose. They made their first home in the U.S. in the Bronx, where Minnie's father, Peretz, worked as a specialized metal worker. Later in her childhood, Minnie's family moved to Ozone Park, where they opened a candy store and a luncheonette. Well, Minnie never really liked to talk about her past. She was always quick to reminisce about how delicious her family's fruit water ice was, especially, as I'm told, the peach water ice. And David shared the memory that Minnie had of landing in America and her father saying, "No more Polish, only English." Minnie took this message to heart and passionately believed in the importance of immigrants speaking English. During her lifetime, she took many immigrants under her wing to teach them English, using magazines, newspapers, and her spunk to teach. In fact, Dale shared with me some messages that she received from a few of Minnie's students after her passing. Listen to what Tatiana, a Russian immigrant, wrote. She said, "Minnie was such a wonderful, amazing, truly unique person, a great inspiration to many women, myself included. I can never forget how much she supported and helped me when I had just moved to the U.S. I owe my first real job here, my first independent place to live, even my ability to speak and express myself in English to her." Minnie and I met when she volunteered as an English instructor for new immigrants, and she has been my teacher, my mentor, my friend, and my great inspiration for so many years. Minnie wasn't just a good teacher. She was an excellent student. She attended Thomas Jefferson High and more than qualified to go to college, but her father refused, explaining that rather than go to college, women should stay home and work. But Minnie was determined to build a successful career for herself. Her first job was doing clerical work for a self-made businessman at Delphi Paint, and then she proudly spent a year studying business by taking night courses at Hunter College. As the family moved, she continued in clerical roles, working an office job at Fort Dix in New Jersey, another at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and finally in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Norfolk, Virginia. When the family moved back to New York, Minnie worked for years at Dale's Security Systems. Dale's sent secret shoppers into stores to see how customers were treated and if there was any shoplifting taking place. As you can imagine, Minnie would often come home after long days of work with some pretty fantastic stories. Finally, Minnie finished her career working at Dave's Quality Paper. As David shared, she started as one of the bookkeepers, eventually became the head bookkeeper, and finally the controller of the huge corporation. Minnie loved working, and even more, she loved making money. But it was less for the money itself and more for what it represented: accomplishment. Minnie was determined to climb to the top, and that she did. She knew that she had arrived when in her contract at Dave's, she negotiated getting a company car, a car that is still proudly in the family today. As Paul told me when I met with some of the family yesterday, the car represented to her the accomplishment of a life of slamming her head against the door until she knocked the door down. That was Minnie, a woman before her time. Vayechi, she lived her life to the fullest. Minnie was dedicated to her career, but most of all, she was dedicated to the people who she loved most. She met her beloved husband, Sidney, in her late teens, soon after graduating from high school. They were married on July 4th, 1940, at Niagara Falls, and were married until Sidney passed away in the summer of 2002. You know, when a couple stands under the chuppah to get married, we recite Sheva Brachot, 7 blessings of joy. In 2 of these blessings, we pray that the couple become Re'im Ahuvim, beloved companions. Minnie and Sidney were certainly beloved companions. They were blessed with 62 years of marriage. They built a beautiful life together, a strong home centered around values and family. Dan, of blessed memory, and then David completed their nuclear family. For a while, the family moved from place to place, from New Jersey to North Carolina to Virginia, and back to New York, specifically Crown Heights, and eventually settling back down in Ozone Park. Stephen told me that he remembers Minnie telling him that she married Sid because he had 3 of the most important things she always looked for in a man. He was intelligent, affectionate, and supportive. Dale added that she remembers how supportive Minnie and Sid were for one another, especially when times were tough and businesses failed. They always had one another's backs. Later in life, Minnie and Sid enjoyed traveling together, going on tours, and doing art together. In fact, the family told me that Sid did the metal work to frame many of Minnie's art pieces. What a beautiful metaphor for their relationship. Yes, first it reminds us of who the boss was. Minnie was always the boss. Minnie was always the chef of life, and Sid her sous chef. But even more, it reminds us of the love they shared, framing each other's talent and beauty to help one another shine even brighter. Re'im Ahuvim, loving companions, blessings fulfilled. Vayechi, they lived. Minnie loved her family dearly and was so proud of all of you. She was supremely proud that David was a doctor and Dan a lawyer, and she would brag frequently about Paul being a lawyer who attended Yale Law and Adam a doctor who attended Harvard Medical School. Truly a family of dummies, I guess. She was also very proud of her great-grandchildren. In fact, when we celebrated Minnie's 105th birthday with an aliyah at Temple Beth Shalom, I have 3 distinct memories. I remember that Minnie that day never stopped smiling, and so many people knew her by her incredible smile. Second, after services while walking home, my 7-year-old son said to me, "Was that lady really 105? And then he continued, "She didn't look a day older than 80. And finally, I remember that at Kiddush, when I came over to say Mazel Tov, all Minnie wanted to talk about was how grateful she was for family and how proud she was of her great-grandchildren, all with that beautiful smile on her face. Speaking of smiling, Marion remembers Minnie teaching her, you always need to have a positive attitude. Never look back, always look ahead. You need to look ahead and smile, because when you have this positive attitude, people want to be with you. she said. And oh, how true this advice was for Minnie. Everyone loved Minnie. If you met her once, you never forgot her. Here are just a few anecdotes from family and friends that Marion shared with me. From cousin Alan. Minnie was a vibrant presence in our family's life. Even the off-color jokes she shared by email told us something about her joie de vivre. She was truly one of a kind. Another family member. We were all so lucky to have her for as long as we did. A friend. She was a kind and remarkable person. And from Marion herself. Aunt Minnie was always in my life. She was my godmother, who I like to call my fairy godmother. She was an excellent dressmaker, and whenever I told her I was knitting a sweater, she asked me to send her some of her yarn so she could send me buttons from her collection. Minnie was so delighted when she heard that our daughter Anna was promoted to CEO of her company. She said that it was so important for women to get top jobs and equal pay. I'm proud of that some of her artwork hangs in our apartment. No one was as social as Minnie Kaufman. Now, I haven't looked in the Guinness Book of World Records, but if Minnie doesn't hold the record for most friends, then I would have to question how the counting is done. She had her lifelong friends in Sylvia and Minnie, and then so many other friends that she collected along the way. So many lives that she impacted through her career, her hobbies, and her recent years at the JCC and more. And as Paul told me yesterday, and as I think we all know, Minnie was truly a gravitational force. She didn't come to do things with you. Rather, you were pulled in to do things with her. It's true. Minnie had a magnetic personality that drew people to her. She was a creative force, a force in business, a force in paving a way for future generations of women. She was a talented artist, working with all sorts of materials and mediums, perhaps best known for her mango pit art. I was even told yesterday that there is an art piece known as the Rabbi Mango Pit. I'm still waiting to see that one. Minnie enjoyed cooking. She was dedicated to health and exercise. She was a talented seamstress, loved to knit, and she was known for her vibrant colors that matched her vibrant heart and soul. She was creative, positive, optimistic, and resilient. She could truly take a punch. And as everyone here knows, Minnie could certainly throw a punch as well. She was never afraid to speak her mind and stand up for what she believed in. Yes, Minnie was demanding, but it was never self-serving. Instead, it was because she fervently believed that there was a way things were supposed to be. She was fiercely independent, strong, determined, relentlessly ambitious, and inspirational. It was this last quality that I, along with the family, was particularly struck by when a couple of weeks ago there was a reception at Lionsgate celebrating Minnie and the arts program that's been named in her honor, thanks to David and Jerry's generosity and thoughtfulness. Minnie found an amazing home at the JCC, and I was struck by the number of JCC staff members, especially females, that stepped forward and shared not only how special Minnie was to them, but how much she inspired them as well. Vayechi, the lessons and virtues of a life well lived, live on. Yes, Minnie's life was filled with many blessings, but she had her deep pains and struggles as well. She lost many extended family members in the Holocaust, which deeply shook her faith. But it is when she lost her beloved son Danny that she seemingly lost her faith altogether. She was devastated by Danny's loss. She buried her grief, virtually never talking about it. But losing Danny left a permanent tear in her heart. It was a tear that could not be mended, but could be cared for. And that is what all of you, her family and friends, did for her. Maybe it was less about losing faith, but her faith shifting to the loved ones that surrounded her. I also want to specifically note the care that you, David, and you, Paul, bestowed upon your mother and grandmother, especially after moving her to Cherry Hill a number of years ago. You made sure that she was cared for with dignity and respect every step of the way, and she knew that you were always there for her. What a magnificent gift you gave her. And while I know that this is a sad moment, I hope you can find a sense of peace today, knowing that just as Minnie was a blessing to you, you most certainly were for her as well. Minnie's strength has become your strength. Her goodness and her love live on within each of you, within all of us. Yesterday, Dale concluded our conversation by saying the following. She said, "Minnie taught me a lot about living, and she also taught me a lot about dying." In her final months and weeks, she expressed a lot of appreciation for the people in her life. She would tell people how much she cared about them. It was almost, as Dale said, like a final love story that she was writing. Her final gift was telling people how much she loved them. Vayechi, she lived. Minnie's long, full life, a life that itself was her greatest work of art of all, has come to an end. But I pray that the memory of the way she lived will be a source of goodness and blessing in your lives for all the days, months, and years to come. Please rise for memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'malot Kidoshim Otorim Kezor Araki Hamazhirim Et Nishmat Mindel Bat Peretz Veleya Shalacha Leolama B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchata Ana Balarachamim Hastireya Beseter Kenafecha Leolamim Utzrur B'Tzrua Chaim Et Nishmata Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Minnie Kaufman who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. You may be seated. Friends, upon conclusion of our service here in the chapel, for those who would like to join us, we'll be driving down to Olney, Maryland, for the internment at Judean Memorial Gardens. That's in Olney, Maryland. And then the family will be returning to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and will be entering the period of Shiva. They'll be sitting Shiva at Minnie's late residence at Lionsgate. That's 1108 Laurel Oak Drive, apartment 137. Comforters are welcome tomorrow night and Thursday evening beginning at 7 p.m. with a minyan at 7:30 p.m. and also on Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Kolzman Vela Kotefes Tachat Hashamayim, Ela Ledet Vela Mut, Ela Tad Ve'ela Fornatua, Ela Rovelirpo, Eli Pros Ve'eli Not. A season set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, a time for hurting and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up. A time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for crying and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering, a time for embracing and a time for refraining. A time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for letting go, a time for ripping